Good morning. I'm Amber Salzman, a member of the ALD Connect Board, and I am joined by a wonderful set of panelists, and if they will come up on stage, we can get started. I have to say, I'm super excited to be talking about the ALD landscape and therapy development. Those of you who know me know that I've been engaged with ALD for just about 25 years, and when I started, maybe a table would be full, if not even that. So I am very grateful to all of you to spend your Saturday talking about ALD. So let's bring the panelists on. So if you don't mind, if you could each please briefly introduce yourself and give a little bit of a headline about what you and your company are doing to develop therapies for ALD, just as a starter. Thank you. Go ahead. We'll start with you, Steve.
Why don't I go last, since we have the newest company?
Okay. Florian, since you're an academic who also is involved with companies, we'll start with you, Florian.
Okay. I guess I'm here because I wear different hats. And so as an academic physician, I've always thought of it as my responsibility also to advance new companies and facilitate collaboration with industry. And we actually have a whole course at Harvard on bridging academia and industry for academics. I founded Swan Bio together with Rachel Saltzman, Karen Kozarski, and I've also been a part of the team that launched the originally the Bluebird Bio trial. So delighted to be part of this panel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ravi Singh. I work at Genetics Biotherapeutics, formerly Bluebird Bio. We are the manufacturers for gene therapy for cerebral adrenal leukodystrophy. I've been at the company for 7 years. I lead our market access, advocacy, and policy team. So within the remit of my team are the teams dedicated to educating and serving the patient community, as well as working with insurance, Medicaid, policymakers on ensuring access and coverage to gene therapy. I've been involved in the launch of all of our gene therapies, and we manufacture gene therapy for sickle cell disease, beta thalassemia, and cerebral adrenal leukodystrophy. We were formerly Bluebird Bio, and Amber, I'm sure we're going to get into that, so I won't get into what our change over to genetics means. But thank you for having me share space with you today. Dr. Vinod Prasad, who many of you know, is conflicted this year at a medical meeting, so I'm covering on his behalf.
Good morning, everyone. I met many of you yesterday and also through several years of attending the meeting. So Aaron Mistry, I'm Chief Medical Officer at Minarex Therapeutics. We are a small Spanish company. We are 30 people, however, highly motivated in delivering products for rare diseases, particularly CNS rare diseases. We've been working in the space for ALD for the past 8 years, which is quite a significant run of preclinical and then also clinical development work, running significantly sized studies in both adults and pediatrics. Our mission is to deliver an approved product for the whole community, pediatrics, adults, male and female. So we'll come to those areas soon.
I'm Steve Robinette. I'm a venture partner at a company called Atlas Venture, which is a company that starts companies. And I've been there for the past decade building companies. Really focused on the development of new therapeutics. I'm a biochemical geneticist by training, so have a PhD in biochemical genetics, and a lot of what I've focused on in that time of building companies is therapies for rare diseases, especially biochemical rare diseases. The reason I'm up here is because I started a company, Spolia Therapeutics, 2 years ago. We have a ALD program in preclinical development, so very much the earliest of the programs here, but very excited by everything that's happened in the space really over the past decade. There's a saying in drug discovery and development of build cars where there are roads, meaning those of us who make the drugs and make the molecules are building the cars, but that's only one part of the equation. A big and probably even bigger part of the equation is actually building the road for those cars to drive on. And that's really what all of the work that's happening in the community is doing. And so I think when we looked at this space a couple of years ago, we said, oh, wow, it looks like there's a road here. And that was really what was, part of the impetus to get the company off the ground and start working on ALD. So nice to meet everyone that I haven't before, and look forward to interacting in these sessions in the future.
So before I start peppering with my questions, I do want to make sure that you guys also, this is really for everyone to get your questions addressed. And it's worth noting that we've really covered the spectrum from the clinicians who see the patients and also do basic research to people who have started developing products to make it to the market, to early companies, to even, we've got, it's really, I can't even believe I'm saying this in the ALD world, that we have Ravi from a company who's commercialized a product for ALD. And there's so much we can learn from each other in that regard, and how next year we can have a crowd of people on the stage who could be talking about this type of stuff. So please, people, really, this is your opportunity to push those who can make a difference in the lives of patients with ALD. So really, I do want to take questions, and don't wait till the end. I will bring them in as we go. So I know, Stephen, you kind of started in some ways talking about the landscape, but I think I'm right in saying that Florian's been involved with this landscape longer than the others in here. So maybe if we can start going down and talking about how you've seen the ALD landscape evolve. And there's a lot of different aspects, of course, and I'm sure each of you will see it from different lenses. But there's the understanding of the disease and lack of understanding, I guess I have to say, therapy development, regulators, patient advocates to be able to, you talk about the road, that's critical, and I think it's a real key message to patients and the role you play in getting your treatments developed, whether it's patient advocacy, biomarkers, endpoints available that if you do have a treatment, really, and all the other million things that I haven't talked about, and from your lens, how you've seen that landscape change.
Yeah, so it's very different, Amber, as you know, from 20 years ago. I completely agree with Steve's that comment, build cars where there are roads resonates with me. I would say, 20, 30 years ago, there were not many roads and the model was different. It was sort of about really starting with a small team around a huge unmet need, whether it was, Patrick with Nathalie in Paris, or what we were doing with David Williams here, and then branch out. Now we are in a much more diverse landscape, where we've recognized that ALD is much larger, but also more diverse. But we're also competing with many other interests. And I think we're right now at a time when there's also a bit of a crisis in our public health sector and science funding. And it's all the more important to highlight that we are coming together as a community and that we recognize shared biomarkers, shared understanding of unmet need across a wider landscape in order to leverage and advocate for our community. So I would say that's the paradigm shift I see.
That's good to hear. Yeah, Ravi, maybe you can.
Yeah, sure. My lens is primarily through gene therapy, and I can't believe it's November of 2025, and we're 3 years past the approval of Skysona. And so, if we think about what has happened over the last 3 or so years, we've seen a lot of evolution, both as genetics and in the broader landscape with the healthcare environment. I'm sure many of you know that our company, when we were Bluebird Bio, we were working very hard to ensure that we could keep our 3 approved gene therapies on the market over the last 2 to 3 years. The company was candidly running out of cash while we were publicly traded. Thankfully, we were taken private in the beginning of June, and we're changed ownership, and we're taken private by Carlyle and SK Capital, which are two private equity growth funds that are focused on ensuring the sustainability and the growth of our business. So I will just say from an evolution standpoint, that represents a major evolution for our company, because what happened over the course of the last year is that we ensured our financial sustainability, which we didn't have when our gene therapies were approved. And to go back to that moment, the landscape and the ecosystem, while somewhat set up to accommodate cell and gene therapies, since cell and gene therapies have been on the market since 2017, 2018 timeframe, there was still a lot of continued adjustment needed in terms of education about these therapies and the delivery of these therapies, particularly as it relates to the healthcare ecosystem, access, coverage, reimbursement. Thankfully, we've seen good access, coverage, and reimbursement from a patient perspective, but that doesn't preclude the adjustments that are needed to accommodate a therapy like ours. So my lens is very much shaped by the trajectory of the company, which thankfully we're in a much better place today than we were even a year ago, as well as the evolving healthcare ecosystem.
Sure. So
No, I'm one of those people, I can walk forever, but like standing still is really, like, seriously, I did Kilimanjaro, but like when they would say, let's take a break, I'm like, can we just walk slowly? So I'm one of those people that it's like on or off.
So I've been in the area for 3 years now with Minorex, but worked in multiple other companies looking at rare diseases. Coming into ALD, also with a clinical background in pediatrics from many years ago, let's just say it's very opinion-driven. So a provocative thought to the clinicians here. You can read a paper and take away a particular opinion. Somebody else can read that paper, take away a different opinion. There's no consistency. So that's one thing that's there in the space, which is unfortunate for the regulators, market access, in terms of how drugs are reimbursed. So there's a significant level of inconsistency and just confusion around the disease area. I think the other aspect is there's a significant lack of natural history data. I think we're in the world of, there's lots of new shiny balls of biomarkers, new discoveries, gene therapy, of course, which is great. But there's some fundamentals that need to be sorted, which are quite critical to get drugs and products, gene therapies, through the hoops that are required. So I think a little bit of thought for having a little bit of a needle at everybody, but it's just one of the things I've observed.
Thanks, Aaron. And I guess going last, and as maybe the newest person here, we can be a little bit, I guess, naive, but thinking about from the perspective of a new entrant, I have tremendous respect for what those who have paved the ground in front of us have done. And Arun, I think in particular, you guys have lived a lot of those, building the road and paving it for the first time, right? I guess as we look at this space and coming into it, I look at the tremendous amount of progress that's happened over the past decade. And again, I think there was a comment early that the theme of this session is around hope, and I see a lot of reasons to be hopeful in terms of everything that's happened in this disease area through the work of the community over the past decade, right? If you think about the types of things that we look for when we're trying to choose a disease area to work on, how many people are there, right? The introduction of natural history over the past decade is always transformative for a rare disease, because you say, okay, well, there should be this many people, but all of a sudden they start coming out of the woodwork, right? And that then transforms how you think about the disease and the spectrum of its clinical presentation. And so you learn a lot more when you start following people for their whole lives, rather than when you pick up somebody with symptomatic cerebral ALD like you might have done 20 or 30 years ago. And then, all of a sudden, you start to actually build natural history cohorts, and you start to follow the evolution of the disease, and you start to be able to say, what is the variability and what symptoms do people develop over the course of their disease so that you can actually do things like design clinical trials knowing what happens to the population, right? And the incredible presentations we saw yesterday in terms of, building new assessments of how do you specifically measure the type of symptom that somebody has in this disease in the best possible way so that we can do so quickly with a small cohort with relatively simple assessments. Those are the types of things that, again, make it so much easier for us building cars to drive down a straight road, right? Other things, and again, recognize there are still challenges in this space. I think, one of them, Arun, that you alluded to was kind of some of the historical kind of puzzlements or confusions, right? In most rare diseases or most inborn errors of metabolism, there are simple principles like a connection between the genetic mutation and the severity of that disease. Connections between a biomarker or an aberrant metabolite and the symptoms that you get in that disease. And again, I think for important historical reasons in adrenoleukodystrophy, many of those things that just should be obvious and should exist in a rare disease were not so obvious in this one. And I think what we're seeing now through the work of Stephen Kemp and others is that those obvious things that were questioned are now actually starting to be somewhat obvious again, right? And that those connections are now becoming clear in the way that they probably always should have been, but for, again, important historical reasons and some of the complexity of the diversity of symptoms in this disease were not always obvious 10 or 15 years ago. Another thing that's, I think, somewhat challenging still for this disease area is just visibility in the way that we talk about the disease, right? I think there's a tendency in some ways to speak about the various symptoms and the symptomatic manifestations of the disease as if they're different diseases. But in fact, whether you have AMN or cerebral ALD or a symptomatic female, it's all adrenoleukodystrophy, right? And I think some of that nuance and that complexity of messaging can get lost or create confusion when you're talking about it outside. And so we've actually had to do a lot of education to investors, to pharmaceutical companies about what is adrenoleukodystrophy. And no, it's not actually 5 diseases, right? And actually, this is a big patient population with a lot of unmet need that's maybe similarly sized to, say, phenylketonuria, a disease that's very well known. But I think there's more visibility, and honestly, the patient community always plays such a critical role in awareness and visibility about those diseases and the unmet need. So again, maybe a little bit new and naive, but hopefully a bit of a message of hope in terms of all of the progress that we've seen be built by this community over the past decade.
That was super helpful, and it kind of brings to light that it's helpful also to bring newbies because we're sometimes too contaminated with our history, so it's good to get fresh perspective. Let me just, before I peppered, was there a question back there?
No, but I have the mic if anyone has a question.
Okay, I have 3 questions if you're willing to put up with it. The first, and the most important for me, and I suspect many others here, is what do you folks have in the works right now that will help symptomatic ALD people? And what's the timeline on what you've got? Second, how might AI be helpful to you? And third, there's a funding crisis, as Florian said. How is that affecting your work, and are there hacks to get around it? So first, what you've got for us. Thank you.
If I can make... Thank you, Joan. That's spot on. If maybe I can even add to it, what could we be doing to make your story better I won't even say next year, next week, so that if you don't have the list of treatments that Joan's asking, or all of us are asking for, what are the challenges that take the people in this room who everybody here is connected to other people, what could be done on all different planes to be able to get you a better answer in terms of getting a treatment? So I don't know if you want to, maybe because you're new to this, I'm not sure people know, are you just working on Amen? Are you just working on cerebral? How early, how late? Maybe you can address, what do you have in the works for, well, I know some were asking just about symptomatic, but just in general. Maybe you can talk about what you have in the works and what could people here do to make it rocket launch speed and at any level. Because I mean, like, for example, you mentioned education, which I completely agree with, but you have a whole room of people that could help you in that regard.
Yeah, thanks. And I apologize in advance because I'm going to not answer your question, which is, when will you have something from us? Again, I think in preclinical development, which is where we currently are with our ALD therapy, it's just a little bit hard to estimate timelines with the same amount of precision that you would with a program that's actually in clinical trials or on the market. But what I will say is that, we have every hope that you'll hear much more from us that's specific in the coming years. A little bit about kind of our approach and where we're focusing. Again, what got us excited about working in this space is what we saw as an opportunity to build a therapy that would be useful for everybody. And that really is our goal and plan and intent. So I can't tell you exactly when it'll be, but that's what we're trying to build.
Yeah, can you give, I mean, I understand you guys are early on, but if you can give any sense of maybe an approach, and if not, do you have a sense of which population you may start in, or any more specifics I can get out of you?
Yeah, sure. No, and again, so we are working on a small molecule. It would be an oral pill, oral therapy, and it's trying to address the fundamental defect that results in pathology across all of the populations. So I recognize that's still a little bit vague, but is hopefully a little bit more information. And what could this community do to help us? I really think, of course, there are all those things like participation in natural history studies and clinical trials, and that's great. I think there's enough kind of focus on that, and I think many people in this community already know that that's important. But I just also stress the organization and visibility, right? And kind of the education about the disease and that external engagement. I don't have concrete recommendations of how to do it. I'm not a patient advocate or organizer myself, but again, I think that type of just awareness about the disease and the unmet need, and bringing that voice to the patient in other forums, I think is really critical and something that would help quite a bit.
Arun, I know you gave a great presentation yesterday in terms of cerebral, AMN, et cetera. I'm not sure everyone attended, but even more specificity to address the question in terms of what you're doing, and also what could people here do to help you move even faster?
Sure. So yes, we've completed a study in adult men with AMN symptoms, and we do have positive data from that. Unfortunately, the regulators weren't quite there. We didn't have the right endpoint for the primary endpoint. The 6-minute walk test, which is quite a rudimentary test, unfortunately, isn't the right test for AMN. However, I think many of you heard yesterday the work that Amina is doing at KKI with the body sway. That's something that came out from the advanced study, and there's ways forward of developing that into an endpoint that the regulators will understand, but there's work to be done there. So I think the efforts that Amina and the team at AMC in the Netherlands are doing to get that data set is fabulous.
Yeah, I'll do a plug for Amina. Everybody should do their follow-up. I know when I talked to Amina yesterday, there were some people that didn't do their annual follow-ups, and we all know how inconvenient and challenging it is, but that kind of data can help Minarex actually potentially get something on the market. Like really, I was super excited to see all the progress in terms of the sway marker. That we have, I think maybe I'm too hopeful. I think we have a shot. But we need as much data as possible. So I'll just join my colleagues here in saying anybody who can, family members or otherwise, who can help with that study, the more data, the better, so that we can convince the regulators. It sounds like Amina's going to do another plug.
Thanks so much, Amber, and for everybody who's already participated, actually doing their assessments even during this meeting, and we're still open for the rest of the day. But I just want to put this out there in case anybody in the room can help me and Etta and Kabak at AMC and the Leipzig group to do this. But I think another big push towards understanding the value of the body sway data and making it ready for an endpoint is to take advantage of the natural history that's already been done by some sponsors. So specifically the Swan Bio or Spur study. I think that my understanding is that they're open to us accessing the Signet study, the natural history data across the various sites, and so there are several centers that really want to put that together, as a publication, get it analyzed. And, I mean, it would be a huge missed opportunity if we can't do that. So that's the next level, I think, as well.
Yeah, just to add, we've also, I presented the Nexus study in pediatric CALD yesterday. We have a positive outcome. We're taking that forward for an approval with the EMA in Europe. With the FDA, we have a pathway for adult CALD. So we're actually recruiting for that study. You may see the flyer on your tables for the CALIX study. We need help with recruitment for that. That's the other thing in rare diseases. Getting patients into the studies is tough. In addition to that study, as I explained yesterday, is a placebo-controlled study because of a lack of natural history, which is something we try to fight very hard against with the FDA. We had support from all the clinicians here, from ALD Connect. Kathleen attended the meeting with us. We pushed and pushed and pushed, but the FDA said, there's not adequate natural history. You have to perform a survival study, which is hard to take. But this is where the natural history is so important. And then finally, really just to add that we are doing work in the space for women with AMN as well. We're performing a natural history study, looking at body sway, looking at other outcome measures which are relevant to AMN, and also looking at spinal cord MRIs as well. It's a 2-3 year study, so it's not something that's going to happen straight away, but we are now fully recruited in Paris, and we have that data sort of being gathered.
Yeah, maybe Ravi, you can.
Yeah, sure. So from a genetics perspective, we've been focused on our continued availability and commercialization of our gene therapy for early active cerebral ALD. We were approved in September of 2022, and over the last year, we have continued our follow-up of our patients through our clinical trials, where we're required to follow up patients for 15 years post-infusion with gene therapy, and in the real-world setting with our post-marketing study for patients that enroll that are treated in the commercial setting. We continue our rigorous efficacy and safety follow-up for those patients that have received our gene therapy, and we continue to collaborate with the FDA on the program. Over the last year, as many of you may be aware, the FDA conducted their own investigation into the program, but alongside that, we were planning, as we always do, to submit to the agency the latest efficacy and safety data with a particular focus on safety. Knowing that the benefit-risk profile for the program continues to be evaluated and looked at in a positive way. Over the last year, we worked with the FDA to evolve and update the US prescribing information, or the label that conveys the safety profile of our gene therapy program, with the latest updates. We plan to do that. The FDA wanted to do it. We were kind of both working in parallel, and that label was updated over the last summer. And we continue to focus on ensuring that we present that data to the community. like I know the data was presented yesterday as well. From a patient community involvement perspective, we've partnered closely with the CALD and ALD community over the development of the program and through commercialization of the program. When the FDA is making their own benefit determinations or risk determinations, they're not just looking at the data, they're not just consulting experts, clinical experts, they actually talk to patients. And so they did conduct a listening tour, or have conducted a listening tour in this space. So when thinking about how to be involved beyond data collection efforts, it's really important to be involved in conversations with the agency or the regulatory bodies. They do listen to the patient community, they center the patient, and they understand the expertise that the patients have. And so thankfully, we continue to work hard on ensuring that our gene therapy remains available to patients, both from a business perspective, as I mentioned, to ensure that we are financially sustainable. Just for perspective, we are hoping to achieve financial sustainability by the end of this year as a standalone gene therapy company in the US. This has never been done before. Thank you for that. This has never actually been achieved before. There are no other biotechnology companies in the US solely dedicated at gene therapy. And so it will represent a very pivotal moment for us, because from that point on, we can continue to operate in a sustainable way. And alongside that, we continue to ensure that that rigorous data collection is occurring and that collaboration with the agency continues.
Could I ask you a couple questions? I mean, if you
Please.
can't, you can't. One is, you mentioned that it would help to get the patient advocacy, and I can't stress this enough. For those of you who follow the gene therapy space, the fact that Elevidys is on the market, considering all its challenges, is because there are some tiger moms who are going to do whatever it takes for their kids, and I really do think that's what helped them. We have tiger moms in our audiences, so what... So when you, more than just we need your advocacy, is there something specific they could and should be doing? That's one question. The other, I'm not sure if you can address, although maybe offline with Arun you can help. I know that there were challenges in terms of getting it on the market in Europe. Is that just off the table for now? If you can address those two.
Sure. Yes. So with FDA opportunities in particular, they do publicize their opportunities for investigation and/or their listening tours. I think, honestly, and not to put the organizers of the ALD Connect organization or other patient advocacy organizations on the spot, but your leadership of your patient advocacy organizations are usually aware when these initiatives are occurring. You can also reach out to us in case we may be aware of those initiatives. And there are just general, like when you look at websites from the FDA about the disease state or the gene therapy, you will see which offices and which divisions are working on it. So you can directly reach out. As it relates to the gene therapy launch in Europe, as I mentioned, I've been at the company for 7 years, so I was actually deeply involved in our European launch efforts, which concluded in 2021 when we withdrew from Europe. Unfortunately, while the regulatory environment in Europe at the time for gene therapy was quite favorable, the reimbursement environment was not as favorable. And so we were not able to achieve the adequate reimbursement of our gene therapies in Europe, both for beta thalassemia and cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy, to continue our business there. Right now, our focus remains on the US and ensuring that we can continue commercialization of gene therapies in the US and do that in a sustainable way. With our change in ownership, we do have greater certainty about our future now and are having conversations about opportunities outside of the US. Candidly, Europe remains a very difficult environment for reimbursement due to where the health authorities are, but we know that these patients are not just in Europe beyond the US, they are around the world, and so we're looking at what those opportunities look like in the disease areas that we serve.
Great. So I'm going to try and answer Joan's question as directly as I can. What do we have available, and what can we do now or as soon as possible? So we do have a trial in women where we looked at a dopamine agonist to improve sleep and gait for particularly restless leg syndrome symptoms, and are analyzing how that is impacting daily performance. I do think all of us clinicians have experience in developing symptomatic treatments or treatments for advanced cases where we don't have gene therapy, bone marrow transplantation available. We've exchanged with Josh, with Troy on experiences with different immune modulatory drugs. We will continue to push that and try to understand how can we get proof of concept on things available for patients. I think to Arun's point about clarity in the field, clarity is not always a function of maturity. Often you can be very early on, you can think, oh, I'm totally clear about this. And as you become more mature, you realize, sorry, it's more complex. And it is more complex because not one size fits all. You have a gene defect, you have a lipid level, and as much as we think those lipid levels are important, they are not predictive of what will happen to you over time. So causality is not given on that end. And we need to create platforms where we can help address all of those people, even if they don't fit in the boxes that we would like them to fit in. So I think that is where I really believe the future is bright as we expand our community and as we bring more and more people into this. There's power in numbers. There's power in these large roads that we're creating across the world. And I see many other people developing new programs. I was talking with Troy. There are many efforts to improve gene therapy. There are more efforts happening to get small molecules underway. I think we're gonna have a bright future, but it's gonna take time. And we should. I think in a few years we'll be sitting here and we said we not only have access, we have options, and that there's a continuous pipeline that we don't have to wait. I think the hardest thing for me is when I see a patient, I say, there's nothing available. I want to be able to say, oh, at least I can give you something. It may not be perfect, but you have access to something and there are options.
Wait, there's another question over. Oh, yeah, couple. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm just wondering about, I mean, when you talk gene therapy, I don't know anything about the small molecule, but the first thing that comes to mind to me is accessibility. Who's going to be a candidate? Who gets the gene therapy? You know, it sounds extremely expensive. You just said you're having issues with marketing it because of the costs. Yeah, my question is about accessibility. I mean, can women get it? Can women afford it? Can insurance pay for it? Things like that, or will they? Assuming that things change in this country.
Yeah. So again, to the point that right now gene therapy is very much tailored to what form of disease you manifest. Whether it's the cerebral disease that you see in boys that is inflammatory, driven, by the bone marrow cells that might be able to rescue that, versus what we see in men and women as spinal cord disease. And just to highlight that, we got all the way from animal studies to a human trial with the help of Swan and Spur, and working with Amsterdam and UMass. They executed a first human trial for gene therapy in men that did not include women. And luckily, although the trial is interrupted, the data is now in a repository at UMass, and will also be shared with KKI and people who are actively working on natural history. But for gene therapy, there are different approaches, and we need to understand what disease is manifesting, whether it's spinal cord or brain. That makes a big difference. But I think for boys, for cerebral ALD, there are definitely options, and there's a lot in the works for men and women.
And then from an accessibility perspective for the gene therapy that's commercially available for those boys with early active cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy, just a few considerations is that the gene therapy is delivered only in qualified treatment centers that have the expertise and capability to deliver that therapy. For us, that is in 6 centers across the US today. And as it relates to insurance coverage, we do see that all clinically appropriate and eligible patients that are candidates for gene therapy do move forward. They don't get ultimately denied by insurance in the US today.
Okay, we had a question over there.
I'm the self-identified tiger mom in the room. So I realize this disease has a lot of complexities. We've seen a lot of complexities, and since knowing about our diagnosis over the last year, we've attended these conferences and seen a lot being done. So thank you so much for all of you, everybody in this room. And I may be oversimplifying this, but how far away are we from a cure for ALD? And what is it going to take to get there?
You know what, maybe, it's a great question. And I mean, Florian, you said something, the way I describe it, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And that's a little bit what's happened with ALD. And to Erwin's point, like, we're not confused because we're not trying. It's like the more we try, the more we get confused. So within the context of that mushy background, how do we still accelerate, like, okay, we don't have to know everything, but what can we do to get a treatment sooner rather than later? Anybody, whether it's research, access, whatever, any crazy idea, what could we do? And I'd really like to hear from everyone here. What could we do, and why should we remain optimistic? And when I say we, it's really the broader we. And for those of you who don't know what I'm referring to with the Tiger Mom, this is for the Duchenne kids, where there was a treatment that it's, there's risks, but there's potential benefits. And the moms were the ones that really pushed to say, look, my kid has nothing. I'm willing to take the risk. And I really, many will agree, if the moms weren't involved, there would be no treatment for those kids. So I want to get your name because we need you to help and others to help. So within the room of having people do anything, what do we have to do to get the treatments for all the different phenotypes, and why are you optimistic?
So maybe I'll just put a stake in the ground and say really it requires the collective effort of all of us. And actually the most important thing that's probably not on stage, but maybe Amber represents, is the newborn screening efforts and that early detection that is completely changing the playing field. So that has been a game changer in terms of effective treatments, because you can always treat something better if it's detected earlier. And we need to do gene correction, we need to do metabolic correction, we need to fight against oxidative stress. All of that is necessary. And that collective is the cure, if you so want. But it's not going to just be one wonder pill. Sorry.
I think from our perspective, it is about that collaboration across the ecosystem, the continued collaboration with the FDA to ensure that we're fully characterizing the benefits and the risk of our gene therapy is very important. We also recognize that our gene therapy conveys risk, and so we have active conversations with researchers and collaborators external to our company to pursue efforts to research and develop a more safe version of our gene therapy. So I remain hopeful that those conversations are happening and will be successful in ensuring a refined and more safe version of gene therapy gets made available. And that collaboration with the FDA, despite the chaos that we do see in Washington, D.C., and including at the FDA, in the change in administration in the past year, we've actually seen guidance documents come out for more innovative, accelerated approaches for research and development for cell and gene therapy and for therapeutics for rare and ultra-rare diseases. So I remain very hopeful from those pieces of, or signals that I see in the ecosystem.
I think there's huge opportunities coming up there's more companies involved in the field than there were before. I think the collaborative research program that was presented just now opens the field up. There are obviously, we want a cure for the disease, but taking small steps still builds the road that Steve was talking about, because the pathway takes time to build. You learn from going down the wrong road or building something that shouldn't be there, or a speed bump. But you learn from that, and everybody learns from that. And I think that's part of the way that the community can help, by sharing as much as possible. The natural history data, from my own personal perspective, not Minarex, so this is my own personal perspective, that is your data as the patient community. It's not the data for industry, it's not the data for clinicians, sorry, Florian and all. It's your data. It's the way that natural history data is being built in Europe, and it's for sharing to ensure that you get the best future approaches to getting therapies on board. And taking those small steps is helpful. There's enormous opportunities coming.
I'll just pile on to that, which I think are all excellent points, which is, for ALD, I don't think any of us know when you could call something a cure and when that'll happen. But we can see the path from other diseases of how you build it incrementally by building roads and incremental progress of every new molecule pushing you further and further towards a standard of care that is excellent and transforms patients' lives, even if you might not call it technically a cure, right? I think the example of Duchenne is an excellent one, right? Where, a very challenging disease, a place where 6-minute walk tests and heterogeneity and all of these challenges really plagued the field. And then, due to a ton of really motivated patient advocacy, at one point there was a regulatory decision of, what if we just approve something on the basis of dystrophin levels? We know that that is directly associated with phenotype and disease, and is that enough for a first therapy, even if we don't know what the long-term benefit is going to be? Let's just start somewhere. Well, then what happened is there's a whole industry of people like us looking for places to drive cars down roads, right? And they said, aha, this is a place where we can actually build the next generation of therapy. And then you see gene therapies, and then you see novel, innovative ways to deliver nucleic acid therapies, like antibody conjugates that use a transferrin receptor to get into the skeletal muscle better. And then you're going from sub 1% dystrophin correction to now, I think the clinical data with Avidity and Dyne and others is in the high single digits or low double digits, right? And again, I think from natural history, those are levels that are associated with profound differences in the natural history and severity of those diseases. So I think people see when somebody starts to drive a car down a road, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, well, I want to do that too, right? And another example maybe is Alzheimer's disease of, if you look at the amyloid field, a place where there was a ton of scientific dispute and confusion for years and years and years, and then there was the decision of, what if we approve a therapy based on amyloid lowering in the brain, based on imaging? And then the first one didn't work so well, but then the second ones worked very well, and then we're able to actually show in confirmatory studies clinical benefit on the most rigorous of scales. And so now you've actually got people enrolling studies that are actually looking at prevention of treating people before they ever develop symptoms, and so they never develop Alzheimer's disease in the first place. I think these are all analogies, right? And any analogy is imperfect, right, for the place that you're thinking about it. But I think they show what you can do or what's possible by building a road and then going down it incrementally.
Yeah, I want to make sure. There's a question over here. Who's got the mic? Or oh wait, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. I didn't have a question. I actually had a statement just to try and answer your question. I think as an advocate, as a patient advocate, as a mother of a child who had cerebral ALD, I think it's our responsibility as the patients to take a lot of it upon ourselves. I think that we were given a tool this morning, specifically yoga, for example, and breathing technique that will actually help regulate your adrenal glands. I know.
because I've lived it firsthand. And I've watched my child live it firsthand. And I know that there's people in this room who've experienced it and watched their child benefit from the ability of knowing how to breathe. Additionally, I believe that we are what we eat. I believe that our food, regardless, and I mean no undue respect, I was told years ago by a professional who studied ALD that my diet had nothing to do with it. However, I'm the only one who walks in my shoes. I know what I ate and when I ate. I know that the time that I was experiencing major spasmodicity in my legs, I was eating and doing the Atkins diet, all high-fat food, okay? I eat very clean now. I started yoga 6 months ago when I was battling, and people in this room know the tears that were shed. Is it my turn to start using walking sticks? Do I have to rely upon my cane or a cane every day? Now, if I want to go fast and I'm at the grocery store, you better bet I'm grabbing a cart and look out. But with that being said, we adapt and we overcome. That is what we do. We put a smile on our face, we adapt and we overcome. We take self-responsibility and we keep moving forward, and we will be your partners in this. Doctors, scientists, thank you. We will find a cure, but each one of us needs to take our steps and do the best that we can every day and communicate back to them so that we can stay on this journey and find a cure for these boys and these upcoming girls who will walk in the same shoes because our genes haven't changed. We have been who we are since day one. We just haven't looked at it with a full microscope or a full view. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we had another question. Yeah, here, Mike here.
I have one that's very hard to follow, what we just heard. But going back to another facet of what we have to do as a community, if you think about in the next 10 years, are the traditional funding models going to get us there? Venture, PE, public markets. What's your advice to this community as far as how do we make sure that the money is there to make the progress?
Boy, we can all answer that one. I don't know if you work for Atlas, so he's got deep pockets.
Yes, sure, and I think this was a question to actually answer one around, how are new therapeutic programs funded and how is that being impacted, recently. And again, I think there are multiple mechanisms, of course, of funding the development of new therapies. Much of what ultimately ends up in our companies has some scientific basis in the academic setting, which is then often funded in the public sphere, right? NIH grants, NSF grants, and yes, there's been a lot of impact on those in the recent 12 months or so, say. It takes some time for that to trickle down to the types of things that we then work on, right? The actual projects and the actual therapeutic programs that are being funded in our labs or in our companies, right? And that is primarily funded, at least in the US. In Europe, there's a bit more public funding for it. In the US, it's mostly funded by private dollars. And that's either, venture capital is a major source of funding. Many times, institutions or philanthropies, right? And actually, this is a place that patient organizations have historically played a role. Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, for example, has been a major, not the source of most of the dollars, but an important contributor to the funding ecosystem for new therapies for cystic fibrosis. And then ultimately that shifts to more mature kind of sources of growth capital, private equity and the like. And so similarly to the public sector, actually the private dollars have been impacted in recent years as well. I think, in the post-COVID, I'd call it sell-off of biotech and pharma to a certain extent. If you look at kind of performance relative to indices like S&P 500 or NASDAQ, biotech and pharma as a sector have been underperforming on an investment basis. I think that has made it more challenging for companies like ours to access capital, even at the earliest stages of the journey, but that capital is still there, and actually the pools of capital that are available are at historic highs, even though they've come down on a relative basis over the past 5 years. So, I think my sense from today's perspective is that the overarching funding model still works-ish. I think it's always open for innovation and reinvention and new sources, of which, again, I think thinking about the extent that patient groups can emulate Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and play a role in kind of anchoring some of that kind of excitement in the community is often very helpful. So,
if I can add to it, I really, having seen the landscape change for ALD, we're very fortunate to have a few really generous donors very recently. I mean, we have to go higher, but what I see, what that gets us is the ability that if a academic lab has a really good ideas, but just because of what's going on in Washington, I'll talk about the US for right now, but if because of Washington they can't get the grants they would have gotten before, we have mechanisms now to initiate some of that early work, because it's hard for a venture firm to do that. It's just not their business model to invest at that level. Once there's a reason to believe that it could actually make it to the market, then venture can get involved. But that early stuff is still a gap. And I think we're kind of at a step change in terms of where we are as an organization, thanks to really wonderful generosity. We still have ways to go, but at least we have enough money to be at the table with some of these sites to be able to say, yeah, we can fund some of those gaps that exist right now to then provide the proof of principle that'll get kind of the bigger dollars behind it. I don't know if that helps. We only have like another minute. Is there others that want to contribute? I mean, we don't. Oh, there's another question back there.
AI.
Oh, right, AI. Anybody here want to? Anyone in the audience, AI guru, who also cares about ALD, who wants to talk about it? Oh, wait, we have someone back there. Oh, just the question. Anybody got a viewed answer on that? I don't know.
I'm happy to take
All
it.
right.
Yeah.
a hard one.
It is a hard one. I'd say, there are, first off, AI is going to make a big impact on the pharmaceutical sector, as it will probably every sector of the economy. I think everybody is willing to accept that as a first principle. I think how that then trickles down into day-to-day impact is much more opaque, and I think we're all still trying to figure out the answers exactly to it. I'd separate it maybe into two kind of categories, actually three categories: drug discovery, drug development, and then all of the ancillaries, right? And I think it's actually kind of all the ancillaries, which is the unglamorous stuff, where it seems like AI is making the biggest impact at the moment. So, there's a lot of reporting and documentation that's involved in just kind of, regulatory interactions and writing up reports and, those types of things. And actually, it seems like, of course, with large language models, unsurprisingly, they're very good at writing documents in kind of standard formats. I think that's probably one of the first places that we'll see the impact of artificial intelligence in our field. It's very unglamorous, though. It's kind of the substrate that sits behind it. I think might trickle down then into things like clinical development. How do you identify patients in big diseases from things like social networks or kind of patient stratification? I think you're seeing that in some companies now. Drug discovery, I think there's a lot of excitement. It still seems pretty nascent, to be honest.
I mean, just to add, I know we're out of time, but I mean, I know I'm the moderator, but for my day job, I do run a biotech, and we're working on FSHD. And just to add where AI has been huge is on endpoints. So I'm working on a muscular dystrophy, which is, there's a lot of variability. Well, with machine learning, we're partnered with an MRI company who can do whole body imaging and calculate muscle fat fraction in a couple hundred muscles. And then when they put in, but again, it relies on patients doing natural history, but then they fed in a bunch of MRIs from a lot of FSHD patients over time, and with their machine learning, they can then say, if this is your fat fraction at baseline, what would you expect your overall fat fraction to be in a year? And then you can see, well, what happens on treatment. And that's kind of with all the variability that happens with these terrible diseases, that's some of the power where machine learning can, I mean, just as a very concrete example to clinical development. So it's hard to answer it as a general, but using it wherever we can is huge. And at least I've seen in my day job a very practical use of it, if that helps. I know we're out of time, but I know this is something that really is near and dear to everyone's heart. Is there any last minute? Yeah, I'm sorry, there's a question back there.
Well, historically, we
Just for those who didn't hear, the question was about Canada.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. So in early Bluebird days when we were in Europe, we were looking at Canada at the same time. It really had to do with the fact that, as I mentioned, cell and gene therapy only company is a costly enterprise, and being able to make that work in a sustainable way is what led to our focus on the US. I do think that the ex-US markets, Canada, Europe, the Middle East, that Vertex is in the same space as us, for example, and they are focused on commercializing their gene therapy in the Middle East and Europe, Canada, et cetera. They're going to help continue to blaze that trail very candidly as they're out there for others to follow.
All right. Well, don't stop here, even though our time is up. Everybody push each other and everyone here to do more, whether it's baby steps, giant steps. We all kind of together have to push and figure out how we can fill the gaps to get a better treatment, because I want to have a different conversation. This is a great conversation. I want to come back in a year from now and be like, oh my God, look at what we got done over the last year. So thank you all.